It began with a stumble, not the kind that draws laughter, nor the kind that results from running too fast. It was different, offbeat, unsettling. Elon didn't know it then, but that stumble would become the hinge on which his entire world would turn. It was a clear spring afternoon in Los Angeles, the kind of day when palm trees sway just enough to remind you they're alive, and the sky seems almost too perfect to be real. Elon had taken the day off, a rare event in itself. He told his assistant at X to hold all calls, moved 2 meetings at Tesla, and even rescheduled a conference call with the engineers at SpaceX. None of it seemed particularly important compared to the occasion at hand, Ava's 7th birthday. She had chosen the zoo. Because flamingos walk funny, she'd said with a grin, the kind of logic that made perfect sense to her, and made Elon laugh out loud. He had picked her up early from Clara's apartment. The handoff was quick, polite, devoid of warmth. Clara didn't look him in the eye, just handed Ava her little backpack and reminded her to wear sunscreen. Elon nodded. That was their rhythm now, efficient, detached. But once they were past the gates of the zoo, Ava's energy filled every space between them. She ran from exhibit to exhibit with a kind of infectious joy that made Elon ache. She had his curiosity, but none of his weight. Her laughter was light, uninhibited. She asked impossible questions. Do giraffes get dizzy if they spin too fast? If penguins get hot, do they just swim deeper? Elon didn't always have answers, but she didn't mind. What mattered was that he listened, and he did intently. They rode the miniature train that looped through the zoo, a clunky, charming ride that rattled over faux wooden bridges and past animatronic lions that had seen better decades. Ava sat beside him, knees bouncing, narrating the scenes like a tour guide. Elon watched her more than he watched the displays. Her enthusiasm was kinetic, like electricity waiting to arc. Then, just as the train came to its final stop, it happened. Ava stood to hop off before the train had fully halted. Elon reached to steady her, but she was already down. One foot landed on the platform. The other didn't quite follow. She twisted slightly, awkwardly, and her small frame crumpled forward. Elon caught her by the elbow, pulling her upright before she could hit the ground. She didn't cry. She wasn't scraped. But her face looked wrong. "Whoa," she murmured, blinking hard, and put a hand to her temple. Her other hand gripped his forearm tightly. Everything went spinny. Elon crouched to her level, brushing her curls back from her forehead. "Are you dizzy, honey?" She nodded slowly, eyes unfocused. "Just for a second." "Maybe you stood up too fast," he said, trying to sound calm, but his voice came out thinner than he wanted. He carried her to the nearest bench and sat her down, offering her a bottle of water. She sipped and smiled faintly. "I'm okay, Daddy," she said, patting his knee. But her eyes, those sharp, observant hazel eyes, looked dimmer, as if a tiny light inside her had flickered. The moment passed. She seemed fine. She got up and ran to the flamingos a few minutes later, laughing again, pointing at their bright pink feathers and mimicking their one-legged stance. Elon tried to shake the unease. Kids fall all the time. Kids get dizzy. It's normal, right? But something gnawed at him as the afternoon wore on. Little things. Ava stumbled again near the reptile house. She complained that the sunlight hurt her eyes. At one point, she trailed off mid-sentence and looked confused, as if she'd forgotten what she was saying. He told himself not to overreact. He told himself he was imagining it. But deep down, in the part of him that had always known how to calculate the odds, something felt off. Elon had lived his life by models, simulations, probabilities. He knew anomalies when he saw them. Still, it wasn't until they were in the car, driving back toward Clara's apartment, that a small, silent dread began to settle in his bones. Ava was quiet in the back seat, staring out the window. The usual stream of questions had stopped. "You okay back there, sweetheart?" he asked, glancing in the rearview mirror. She blinked, startled, and nodded. "Yeah, just sleepy." That night, he couldn't stop thinking about the look she'd given him when she fell, the way her body had gone slack, the way her hand had trembled as she reached for his arm. He pulled up a tab on his laptop and typed, dizziness in children plus sudden onset plus fatigue. The search results were what you'd expect: dehydration, low blood sugar, inner ear infections. All the harmless things first. But then, further down the page, more ominous terms began to appear. Neurological disorders, pediatric seizures, metabolic diseases. He closed the laptop. He told himself it was just a birthday crash, a sugar crash, a long day. He texted Clara a brief summary. Ava had a small fall, but she's fine. A little dizzy, but nothing serious. Just wanted to let you know. Clara didn't respond. She rarely did unless it was urgent. He went to bed but didn't sleep. At 3:14 a.m., he got up, walked into the hallway, and stared at a photo on the wall. Ava in a swing, laughing, her legs kicking out into a sun-drenched sky. The picture was a year old. She looked invincible in it, but the image wouldn't reconcile with what he'd seen that afternoon. He couldn't shake the sensation that something fundamental had changed. In the morning, he called Clara. She picked up on the second ring, groggy. "Elon, what's wrong? Did Ava say anything when she got home? Did she seem off to you?" Clara paused. "No. She was tired, but it was her birthday. You wore her out. Why?" He hesitated. "She got dizzy. Twice. Once after falling. I know it sounds small, but it didn't feel small." Clara exhaled. "You're overthinking. Kids fall. She's fine." He wanted to argue, but what could he say? That he had a hunch? That her eyes looked dimmer? So he said nothing, but the feeling remained, like a low hum just beneath the surface. 2 days later, it would happen again, worse. But for now, Elon stood at the threshold of a truth he couldn't yet name, watching from the edge as the first tremor rippled through the foundation of his life. Clara had noticed things, tiny, flickering inconsistencies in Ava's behavior, but they had been just that, flickers. Brief, faint, and easy to wave away. A crayon drop mid-drawing. A fearful glance at a staircase she'd climbed 100 times before. A whispered complaint about the hallway spinning, shrugged off a moment later with a smile. Clara had filed them all into the mental drawer labeled childhood quirks, alongside scraped knees, forgotten lunchboxes, and sudden preferences for green over blue. She had convinced herself that every child stumbles through phases. Growth spurts, sleep regression, emotional waves from the divorce. It had been 2 years since she and Elon split. Ava had been 5 then, young enough to adjust but old enough to carry invisible bruises. Clara believed the occasional strange behavior was just Ava's way of adjusting. She told herself this the way parents do when something doesn't feel quite right but lacks a name. But now, after the zoo, after the fall, after the voice on the phone, those flickers no longer felt like nothing. It was evening when Elon called. Clara was in the kitchen, making lentil soup, the same one her grandmother used to cook on long Italian Sundays. Ava was coloring at the table, tongue peeking from the corner of her mouth, in concentration. When the phone rang and Elon's name lit up the screen, Clara froze. She hadn't heard his voice in months. They texted when necessary, efficient, neutral, transactional. A schedule adjustment here, a school form there. But this was a call. She answered cautiously. "Elon." His voice was quiet, lower than she remembered, touched with something she couldn't place. "Clara, hey. Sorry to call. We need to talk. About Ava." Clara's stomach tightened. "What happened?" "She fell. At the zoo. Nothing serious at first glance. No blood, no bruises. But was strange, Clara. The way she looked at me afterward, like a light went out for a second. She was dizzy. She said everything was spinning." Clara didn't answer right away. Her eyes drifted to Ava at the table, still coloring. Her tiny hand wrapped around a green pencil, but not tightly, loosely, like it might fall at any moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "You saw it too." Elon paused. "What do you mean?" "I've seen things. Little things. Dropped pencils, dizziness, clinging to railings like they're cliffs. She told me the walls spin sometimes, but then she laughs it off, or says it was nothing, and I wanted to believe her. I needed to." Clara turned away from Ava, walking into the hallway to speak freely. Her hands trembled. I thought I was being paranoid, that maybe the divorce had made me overprotective. But I see it now, Elon. You saw what I saw. It's real. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't cold, it was heavy, shared. And in that quiet space, something shifted between them. Not reconciliation, not warmth, but a thread of unity neither had felt in years. I think we need to get her checked out, Elon finally said. Not just a pediatrician, someone who can look deeper. Clara nodded, even though he couldn't see her. Neurology? Yes, just to be safe. I don't want to scare her, but I can't ignore this. Clara's eyes welled, and she pressed a fist against her lips to quiet the sob that rose. It's not nothing. I kept telling myself it was, but it's not. And then, unexpectedly, she began to cry. Not softly, deeply. The kind of cry that rattles inside your chest, that comes from somewhere you didn't know was aching. She hadn't cried in front of Elon since the night they signed the papers, when he'd said, "We'll figure it out," and she hadn't believed him. Now all that hurt, all that guilt, both shared and unspoken, poured out. "Clara," Elon's voice broke, caught between guilt and helplessness. "I'm so sorry. I should have." "No," she cut in, wiping her face. "We both should have. But right now, it doesn't matter. What matters is her." There it was. Agreement. Not on marriage. Not on the past. But on Ava. Clara returned to the kitchen, heart pounding. Ava looked up, eyebrows raised. "Who was that?" "Daddy," Clara said, forcing her voice steady. "We were talking about your trip to the zoo." Ava lit up. "I saw flamingos, and a gorilla scratched his butt." Clara laughed through her tears. "Sounds like a wild day." Ava turned her attention back to her drawing, content. But Clara watched her now with new eyes. Every motion, every blink. She noticed the pencil slip once, then again. She noticed how Ava tilted her head slightly, as if the room leaned sideways. How her grip faltered just before she switched colors. They weren't random moments anymore. They were signs, and Clara could no longer forget them. That night, after Ava went to bed, Clara sat on the couch and pulled out her laptop. She didn't search for symptoms, she searched for specialists. Neurology clinics, children's hospitals, anything that could offer clarity in the fog. A name popped up, Children's Neurocenter of Southern California. Highly rated, specializing in rare disorders. Clara bookmarked the page. She would call in the morning. She sent Elon a message. "I'm looking into specialists. We should go together. She trusts you. We'll do this right." A minute later, her phone buzzed. "Thank you. I'll be there." And for the first time in a long time, Clara didn't feel alone. The waiting room at the Children's Neurocenter of Southern California smelled faintly of lemon disinfectant and uncertainty. Clara sat rigidly on a cushioned bench, her hands folded so tightly in her lap that her knuckles whitened. Elon paced. His steps were even, almost mechanical, an engineer's instinct to move, to calculate, to fix. Ava, drowsy from a sedative used during the MRI, was asleep in the adjacent recovery room, a nurse seated beside her, flipping through a magazine she wasn't really reading. It had been 3 weeks since the fall at the zoo. 3 weeks of consultations, referrals, paperwork, and rising dread. The first pediatrician smiled too easily. "Kids are clumsy at this age," he said. "Probably nothing." Clara left that visit with relief she didn't trust. The second doctor took it more seriously, ordering a basic panel of neurological assessments. "Just to rule things out," he said, but even his tone carried a subtle tremor. Then came the third doctor, Dr. Ahmed, a pediatric neurologist with decades of experience and eyes that had seen too many worried parents walk in with hope and out with ashes. He was kind, precise, and asked too many quiet questions. He observed Ava's hand strength, her eye movements, her walk, her reflexes. He didn't say much during the exam, just took notes, and frowned ever so slightly. Now they were here again for the results. The door to the consultation room opened with a soft click. "Mr. Musk, Ms. Ferraro," the nurse said. "The doctor will see you now." Clara stood first. Elon followed, jaw tight. They stepped into a small, sterile room with a desk, a computer, and a framed photo of the doctor's two sons on a soccer field. Dr. Ahmed entered a moment later, holding a thin folder. He didn't sit right away. Instead, he looked at both of them as if bracing himself. "I have the results," he said. His voice was level but gentler than usual. He opened the folder but didn't look down at it. "I'll be direct." Clara's heart dropped into her stomach. "What Ava is experiencing," Dr. Ahmed began, "isn't due to normal development or fatigue. Her MRI and genetic screening have shown evidence of a rare neurodegenerative disorder. It's genetic, progressive, and unfortunately, at this time, there's no known cure." The words fell like iron bars. Clara didn't speak. Her mouth moved, but no sound came. She felt the air leave her lungs in one silent rush, as if someone had kicked her chest. Elon, however, leaned forward, eyes narrow, voice steady. "What kind of disorder? What does it do?" Dr. Ahmed folded his hands. "It affects the white matter in the brain, the wiring that carries signals between different parts. Over time, those connections degrade. Slowly at first, then more rapidly. You'll see increasing motor difficulties, coordination loss, speech problems. Later stages often include cognitive decline." Clara made a choking sound, then covered her mouth. Elon kept pressing. "But there are studies, research, clinical trials. Surely there's something in development." "There are studies," Dr. Ahmed confirmed with a sorrowful nod. "There's early-stage research being done in Europe and parts of the US, gene therapy, stem cell applications. But nothing approved, nothing conclusive. These treatments are years away from availability and uncertain even then." His voice softened further. "It's like a battery," he said, "one that loses charge over time. The body can't restore what's lost, and there's no way right now to recharge it." That metaphor pierced through Elon's logic. He could build batteries. He could calculate entropy, optimize discharge rates, reinvent the physics of energy retention. But not this. Not inside his daughter. He looked away, his hands curled into fists. "I'm so sorry," Dr. Ahmed added, almost a whisper. "We'll connect you with a support team, neurology, physical therapy, counseling. You won't be alone in this." But they were. They were so devastatingly alone in that moment. Clara finally found her voice, thin and cracked. "How long?" "There's no exact timeline," the doctor replied. "It depends on progression. But the window for intervention, to slow decline, if there's any window at all, it's now." They nodded, or maybe just stared. It was hard to tell. Dr. Ahmed stepped out to give them privacy. The door closed with a soft click. For a moment, neither Elon nor Clara moved. The fluorescent lights buzzed quietly overhead. On the other side of the wall, Ava stirred in her sleep, murmuring something unintelligible. And then Elon stood. With one deliberate step, he walked to the wall and drove his fist into the drywall. The thud echoed in the room like a gunshot. White dust scattered onto the floor. Clara didn't flinch. She didn't scold. She didn't speak. She simply stood and crossed the small space between them, placing her hand gently on his arm. He looked at her, eyes red, breath uneven. And then something broke. The dam of control, of pretense, of distance. He cried, and Clara cried with him. They sat together in that room for a long time, hands entwined, hearts unraveling. For the first time in years, they weren't co-parents or exes or opposing forces. They were just two human beings, devastated, united in grief, sitting in the wreckage of a diagnosis that had no map and no mercy. The world blurred into a carousel of consultations, tests, and sterile hallways. After the diagnosis, there were no restful days, only questions, research, and the gnawing sense that time had transformed into both an enemy and a currency they were rapidly spending. Clara dove into medical journals and obscure forums late into the night, her laptop glowing in the dark like a lighthouse for the desperate. Elon sent messages to neurologists in Tokyo, geneticists in Zurich, biotech labs in Montreal, and clinical researchers in Tel Aviv. It didn't matter the time zone or the cost. He needed answers. And still, Ava was slipping. She no longer sprinted down hallways or danced in place when she was excited. Her right leg lagged ever so slightly, like a beat missed in a rhythm only she could feel. Sometimes she dragged it just enough for Clara's heart to jolt. She stumbled now and then, not because she was clumsy, but because her body wasn't listening quite right. Her grip weakened. She dropped her favorite juice cup twice in 1 week. She never used to drop things. Hospitals became routine. They learned the smells of antiseptic and latex gloves. Ava began to ask why everyone wore so much white. Elon joked that doctors must be afraid of color. Ava laughed, but Clara noticed her eyes didn't sparkle the same way. The rooms were always white, perfectly lit, padded chairs with ergonomic backs, huge glass windows framing views of parking garages or ornamental gardens. Doctors in sleek suits or lab coats entered with carefully arranged expressions, too cheerful or too guarded. They spoke in delicate fragments. We don't have much data on this condition. It's very rare. Fewer than 24 documented cases. No established treatment protocol. We focus on quality of life and comfort. Palliative care. The phrase came up again and again, like a soft hammer striking their hope. But Elon didn't flinch. He sat forward during every consultation, questions lined up in his head like dominoes. He scribbled notes, asked for access to data sets, requested anonymized case histories. His emails to doctors became more technical with every day. At night, Clara would sometimes find him in the living room with medical textbooks and a notebook filled with incomprehensible equations. Clara, in her own quiet way, began doing the same. She taught herself enough cellular biology to understand academic abstracts. She read about oligodendrocytes and axonal decay, about metabolic precursors and gene suppression techniques. She made a spreadsheet of all clinical trials remotely connected to white matter degeneration, tracking contact info and trial statuses like a general plotting a war map. Still, the answers were always the same. No cure, no protocol, no precedent. One night, after a particularly demoralizing visit to a prestigious clinic in Palo Alto, where a physician spent most of the session explaining how rare diseases aren't commercially viable for pharmaceutical investment, Elon and Clara returned to his house with Ava already asleep in a car. They carried her in gently, laid her in the guest room, and stood outside the door in a long silence. Then Elon suggested dinner. They hadn't eaten all day. He reheated some leftover mushroom risotto while Clara opened a bottle of red wine she found in the back of his pantry. They ate at the long kitchen island, Ava's stuffed giraffe sitting on the counter beside them. The air was heavy with silence, the kind that grows between people who are holding too much. Clara pushed her plate aside halfway through. "You know what I hate the most?" she said softly. "They talk to us like she's already gone." Elon didn't respond. He simply stared down at his plate, unmoving. They talk about comfort and coping strategies and how to help siblings adjust. But they don't say one word about fighting it. Not really. Elon finally looked up. Because they don't know how. Clara held his gaze. Then maybe we have to be the ones who do. He blinked. "What do you mean?" She leaned in slightly, her voice low and firm. "What if we built our own protocol? Funded our own study? Hired a team? Used your labs, your reach, our minds?" He was silent. Her eyes didn't waver. "We start from scratch. No waiting. No approvals. Just forward motion." Elon put his fork down midair. "You want to work with me?" Clara shook her head. "No. I want to save our daughter. If that means working with you, so be it." The silence between them thickened again, but now it was electric, charged with something new. Elon stood and began pacing. "We need a gene therapy specialist, someone who's worked on orphan conditions, a cell biologist, data modelers, maybe even quantum chemists if we're looking at metabolic interaction rates." "I already have a list of candidates," Clara said. He stopped mid-step and turned. "You do?" Clara nodded. "You're not the only one who doesn't sleep." He almost smiled. It was faint, brief, but real. They stayed up that night sketching out a plan. They knew it was insane, dangerous, maybe even illegal in some countries. But what choice did they have? Waiting was just a slow death wrapped in politeness. They didn't talk about what their relationship was now. That wasn't important. What mattered was Ava, her laugh, her wild questions, her future, and they would chase it together. They started from nothing, no protocol, no precedent, no playbook. Just a sick child, two determined parents, and the refusal to accept the word impossible. Elon tapped into his vast network of engineers, thinkers, and dreamers, not to pitch a new product or prototype, but to save one life. Clara reached out to people with a different kind of knowledge, parents like her navigating uncharted territory in rare disease groups and forums no one talks about unless they're desperate. Their efforts collided in an unexpected, chaotic harmony. Elon's first call was to a biomedical engineer named Dr. Samir Laghari, a former colleague from a Mars habitat simulation team who had since shifted his focus to neural interface devices. Samir hadn't worked on anything pediatric before, but he responded within the hour. If you're building something that matters more than rockets, I'm in. Clara, meanwhile, connected with a mother in Boston whose son had passed away from a similar condition 3 years earlier. The woman didn't have scientific credentials, but she had lived the entire diagnostic maze and knew the pain point of every system. She introduced Clara to Dr. Iris Kaufman, a retired geneticist who had once led a team mapping the degradation pathways of rare mitochondrial diseases. Dr. Kaufman had left her career behind after losing faith in institutional inertia, but something in Clara's voice, the tremble wrapped in conviction, made her reconsider. A third member joined after overhearing a conversation in the Tesla cafeteria. Julian Morales, a back-end programmer with no medical background, asked Elon directly if he could volunteer after learning the project involved degenerative nerve conditions. His younger brother had been diagnosed with spinal muscular atrophy at age 8 and died before 17. I don't know the biology, Julian admitted. But if you need code to simulate anything, build databases, automate models, I'm yours. Soon, 2 more joined, an intern from Stanford specializing in molecular biology who'd been disillusioned by academia, and a soft-spoken data analyst named Nia who had worked with the CDC during COVID and wanted desperately to believe in human-scale impact again. No one was an expert in Ava's disease, but each person had a reason, a story, a wound that made them stay late, think deeper, and try harder. In less than 2 months, they were 6. A team not of credentials, but of purpose. Elon repurposed a seldom-used lab space at SpaceX's Hawthorne headquarters. It had once been used for stress testing materials for lunar vehicles. Now it became their war room. White boards were covered in DNA schematics, brainscan printouts, and hand-drawn timelines made with Sharpies. Desks overflowed with laptops, snack wrappers, printouts, and coffee cups. A miniature refrigerator hummed in the corner with labeled test samples that no regulatory agency had approved. The room buzzed with urgency. Clara, though she wasn't in the lab full-time, orchestrated the human side. She kept the team grounded in reality, Ava's reality. She tracked her daughter's symptoms, kept video logs, noted changes in her gait, speech, or balance. She became the living case study, the advocate, the bridge between cold data and the warm chaos of a real child slowly slipping away. By then, Ava had started using crutches. The leg that once dragged now resisted movement entirely. She'd trip over carpets that weren't there, but she adapted. She named her crutches Flip and Flop and drew stars on their handles with glitter pens. She didn't understand the full scale of what was happening, but she sensed the urgency. One afternoon, she asked Clara, "Why are you and Daddy always working now?" Clara had smiled, brushed a curl from Ava's forehead, and said, "Because you're amazing, and we've got work to do to keep you that way." Nights became their sanctuary. After Ava went to sleep and the last team member left the lab, Elon and Clara remained. They reviewed progress, argued over methodology, laughed at code bugs, cried over failed trials. They lived in the tension between hope and heartbreak, but somehow those hours felt alive, real. One night, as they shared takeout on the lab floor, Thai food, slightly cold but comforting, Clara caught Elon looking at her. Not a glance, a look, the kind that holds. "What?" she asked, mouthful of noodles. "You're not the same person I married," he said, half smiling. Clara blinked. "Thanks." "I mean it," he said, placing the container aside. "You're stronger now, sharper, fiercer." She wiped her mouth with a napkin. "I had to be." He nodded. "I see that." There was a pause, soft and stretching. "And you," she added, "you're different too." "In a good way. In a desperate dad way." Elon laughed, then sighed. "Yeah, that sounds about right." Another silence, but this one was companionable. They didn't define what was rebuilding between them. They didn't need to. It was in the shared silence, in the way they reached for the same pen at the same time, in the way they stayed past exhaustion. It was in the fact that they were looking at each other again, not as opponents across a courtroom or broken pieces of marriage, but as two people who had remembered something vital. They still believed in the impossible. And now they were trying to prove it, together. Ava had always loved to draw, but since her diagnosis, her drawings had taken on a life of their own. No longer random doodles or colorful animals, they became elaborate maps, world cities, landscapes unlike any found in textbooks or on Google Earth. Each one had a purpose, a system, a reason. "This," she'd say, pointing to a swirl of blue hills and pink rivers, "is where the legs don't get tired." Another map showed glowing bridges between stars floating in a red sky. Here's where the nerves talk faster. They don't forget things. One had a silver tower shaped like a neuron with an elevator that only went up. "This is where falling doesn't hurt." Clara watched Ava make them with quiet awe. Crayons, pencils, glitter glue. Her small hands moved with urgency, as if the maps needed to be finished before something else caught up to her. She would sit on the floor for hours, tongue curled at the edge of her lips in concentration, legs stretched out awkwardly because folding them had become difficult. Flip and flop, her crutches leaned against the wall like silent guards. Elon began collecting the drawings, taking photos of each one, cataloging them like data points. But more than just keeping them, he used them. In pitch decks, internal memos, and calls with scientists across the globe, he opened presentations not with clinical language, but with Ava's worlds. "This," he said in a virtual meeting with a biotech startup in Belgium, "is not just a child's drawing. This is a mind making sense of its own breakdown. She's mapping hope. Are we really going to let that go dark?" He showed another map to a hesitant investor in Singapore. "You fund games. You fund social media filters. Fund this instead. Fund something that might let a 7-year-old walk without help again." The effect was immediate. People remembered Ava, not just her condition, but her fire, her vision, her impossible cartography of the body and soul. At home, Clara noticed Ava doing something new. She began to write. It started with short paragraphs, awkwardly spelled, then turned into stories, always about the same character, Nia, a girl astronaut who piloted a spaceship called the Mend through the universe of the human body. Nia traveled to the lungs of lava, where she cooled the fire with breath crystals. She visited the cracking knees, where she stitched up tectonic plates with vines made of music. In one chapter, Nia faced a dark cloud called the Fade, a storm that tried to erase colors. But she sang a memory, Ava wrote, and the colors came back. Clara read every word, her throat tightening with each line. These weren't just stories. They were Ava processing what was happening to her in the only way she could, by turning her fear into fantasy, her decline into adventure. One night, Clara brought a stack of the stories to the lab. Elon read them slowly, quietly. When he reached the part where Nia finds a hidden planet inside a broken bone and says, "You still matter. Even broken things have gravity," he looked up, eyes wet. "This is genius," he said, voice low. "It's metaphor, narrative, child psychology. It's everything. We have to use this." So they did. The team scanned Ava's drawings and stories. They coded Nia's journey into the algorithm's framework. Elon renamed the initiative Project NI, an acronym that stood for Neurological Interface Atlas, but also, more importantly, for the little girl whose stories had given their work a soul. Julian, the Tesla programmer, built a visual interface based on Ava's maps, translating them into a 3D rendering of brain pathways. Dr. Kaufman cried when she saw the overlay. She mapped affected white matter zones more intuitively than half the models we've seen. Samir reworked the therapeutic delivery system into planets, each targeting a different brain region with a specific molecular crew. Clara suggested using story sequences to help Ava during her sessions, turning therapy into missions for Nia. One evening, as Elon showed Ava the interface with her maps glowing on a giant screen, she tilted her head and asked, "So Nia's real now?" Elon crouched beside her, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. She was always real. Ava looked at the digital projection of her worlds, her wide hazel eyes reflecting the colors. "She's me, right?" He nodded, and Ava smiled brightly, beautifully. "She's not afraid of anything." "No," Elon said, his voice thick, "and neither are you." That night, they hung one of Ava's maps on the lab wall beside whiteboards and protein charts and heat maps of nerve decay. It was a mess of stars and rivers and winding trails labeled with things like "No Tremble Trees" and "The Never Fall Bridge." It didn't belong in a lab. And yet it did, because it reminded everyone why they were there. Not just to analyze, but to believe, to try. It was late afternoon when Elon knocked on Clara's door. He hadn't planned to stay long, just a quick visit to pick up some paperwork for Project NI, forms they needed to submit before Friday. Clara had texted him that morning, saying she found them tucked inside a stack of Ava's drawings. "They're in an envelope," she'd written. "I'll leave them by the door if I'm not home." But she was home. The door opened before he could knock a second time. Clara stood there in a navy blue cardigan, her hair tied up in a loose bun. She looked tired, but not in the chaotic way of someone overwhelmed, more in the quiet, worn-out way of someone carrying something too heavy for too long. "Come in," she said, stepping aside. The scent hit him first: jasmine tea, lavender candles, and the faint must of old pages. It was comforting, familiar, a house that had been lived in with love and loss. As he stepped into the living room, his eyes landed on the small figure curled up on the couch. Ava, asleep under a crocheted blanket, her curls tousled and her lips slightly parted. One of her crutches rested beside her like a sleeping companion. "She had a tough morning," Clara whispered. "Muscle spasms." She asked to rest. "She's been out for an hour." Elon nodded but didn't speak. He moved quietly, respectfully, taking in the room. The same space he once knew like the back of his hand, now changed, rearranged, and yet not. The bookshelves still held his old biographies. A chipped mug with an X logo sat on the end table. And on the wall above the television, a framed photo from a trip to Big Sur years ago. The three of them, standing on a cliff, wind in their hair, smiles unguarded. Clara returned from the kitchen holding an off-white envelope, slightly worn at the edges. "These were with the papers," she said, handing it to him. "Drawings. She didn't want to show you. I don't know why." Elon took it slowly, almost reverently, and sat down at the wooden dining table. He opened the flap carefully, like unsealing something sacred. Inside were 6 sheets of paper, each one vibrant with color and emotion. One had a castle made of bones labeled "Safe Place." Another showed a tiny spaceship navigating a storm of black lines titled "Pain Day." But it was the last drawing that stilled his breath. It was simple, almost childlike, 3 figures holding hands under a big yellow sun. The faces were smiling, unmistakably Ava's artwork. Above them, scribbled in purple crayon, "When we were us." Elon didn't say a word. He just held the page, staring at it with the kind of stillness that feels heavier than motion. His fingers tightened slightly around the edges, careful not to crumple it. Clara sat across from him, watching. She didn't speak either. Words felt too sharp for a moment like this. For a long time, they just sat there, the drawing between them, and Ava's soft breathing the only sound in the house. Outside, The late-day sun filtered through gauzy curtains, casting golden light across the hardwood floor. The world slowed down in that room. No algorithms, no research timelines, no crises to manage. Just memory and presence. Clara finally looked away, blinking against the sting behind her eyes. "She remembers it all," she said softly. "Even the good parts. Maybe especially those." Elon looked up, eyes rimmed red but dry. "I wasn't always who I should have been." Clara nodded. "Neither was I." Another silence passed between them. Not cold, not uncomfortable, just full. "She asked me once," Clara continued, her voice barely above a whisper, "if people stop loving each other when they forget how to be happy together." Elon let out a breath through his nose, not quite a laugh, not quite a sigh. "What did you say?" "I said no. I said love doesn't vanish. It just sometimes gets buried under pain. Or silence." He looked down at the drawing again. "When we were us." "I don't think she wants us to go back," Clara added. "I think she just wants to know that we were real, that we meant something." "We did," Elon said. Clara looked at him. "We still do." He nodded slowly. They stayed like that for half an hour. No meetings, no deadlines, just sitting in the same room, sharing the quiet. There were no promises made, no confessions exchanged. But something subtle shifted, the kind of shift that doesn't announce itself. Like the first leaf falling before autumn. Ava stirred slightly on the couch, but didn't wake. Elon placed the drawing back into the envelope with careful fingers. He didn't ask to keep it. He didn't need to. Some things, once seen, never leave you. It came at 2:43 a.m., like most miracles do, quiet, unannounced, and almost lost in the noise of everything else. Elon sat alone in the converted lab, surrounded by the low hum of machines and the soft blue light of sleep-deprived screens. The others had gone home hours earlier. Julian had fallen asleep on his keyboard again before Clara made him leave. Even the vending machine had powered down. Elon's eyes burned as he stared at his inbox, fighting the urge to refresh it for the 100th time. 83 emails. 83 ignored messages to labs, researchers, universities, private biotech startups. Some didn't answer. Some replied with polite rejection. Too experimental, too narrow, not enough clinical precedent. But tonight felt different. Or maybe that was just exhaustion painting his hope in softer colors. He clicked refresh one more time. And there it was. Subject, Project NIA, urgent inquiry. From Dr. Linnea Norgren, Genomic Therapeutics, Lanska Institute, Sweden. He blinked, then opened it. The email was brief, just 6 sentences, written in that curt but deliberate tone of someone who chooses every word like a scalpel. "Mr. Musk, I've reviewed the documents you attached. The algorithmic pattern recognition from Project NIA is unlike anything we've encountered in pediatric neurodegeneration. Your visual narrative integration, though unconventional, merges computational modeling with patient-centered neuroplasticity in a way we hadn't considered. There may be overlap with a theory we are testing involving epigenetic modulation using targeted lipid matrices. It's an early exploratory phase. If you're willing, we propose a visit. We'll cover our side. We are cautious but curious. And sometimes curiosity is how breakthroughs begin." And then, Elon stared at the screen for a full minute before leaning back in his chair, breath leaving him in a soft, stunned exhale. After weeks of silence, someone had answered. Not just anyone, but a team with vision. He pulled his phone from his pocket and typed a one-word message to Clara, Sweden. He left 2 hours later. While he packed a small bag at home, Clara replied with a thumbs up and a heart. She didn't ask for details. She knew Elon well enough to recognize what Sweden meant, and she trusted him. Not as the father of her child, not as a man who once broke her heart, but as the one person in the world stubborn enough to kick down a door no one else saw. Elon boarded the flight before sunrise. A commercial jet, private only in name, surrounded by weary travelers and long-haul whispers in languages he barely registered. He didn't sleep. He reread the Project NIA documents. highlighted sections in Ava's stories, studied her maps, ran through every formulation of the lipid modulation trials that had failed in the States. Meanwhile, back in LA, Clara stayed grounded, literally. Ava had experienced 2 bad days in a row, the muscle spasms leaving her more fatigued than usual. Clara adjusted her routine, prepared soft foods, and slept on a yoga mat beside her daughter's bed with one hand resting on Ava's blanket. They read more Nia's stories together. In the newest one, Nia dove into the Brain River and found a glowing fish called Memory, who showed her the secret door to the healing core. Ava called it her favorite chapter. Because sometimes healing isn't loud, she whispered. In Stockholm, Elon was met by a man in a gray coat who said little but drove fast. Snow flurried against the windshield as they left the city and wound through silent pine forests. The lab, hidden behind what looked like a forestry research building, was discreet by design. It was there that Dr. Linnea Nordgren greeted him. Mid-60s slender frame, piercing ice blue eyes that never darted or flinched. They didn't waste time. Within an hour, Elon was in a sleek conference room surrounded by a small team of Swedish scientists, most of whom had seen only the technical portion of Project NIA. None had seen Ava's drawings. Elon began with those. He projected Ava's maps onto the screen, the ones with colors too bold for a medical presentation, words too imaginative for a data set. Here's where the legs don't get tired. This is the Never Fall Bridge. The pain storm lives here. Then he pulled up a video, Ava's voice narrating a story as Nia journeyed through the spinning brain forest. At one point, the screen flickered with the image of a hand-drawn neuron lit up with stars. She's mapping her own decline, Elon said softly, but she's doing it in hope. For the first time, Dr. Nordgren leaned forward. You did all this with a 6-person team, she asked. Elon hesitated, then answered with desperation. But now we have faith. What followed was unexpected. Interest, real, tangible, scientific engagement. Nordgren's team had been developing a theory around using specific oils, lipid-based vectors, to modulate genetic expression in glial cells. Their work was buried in paperwork and blocked by ethical committees. But Project NIA, with its narrative-layered mapping and patient-specific logic models, opened a new door. In 2 days, the agreement was drawn up. A joint initiative. The Lansker Institute would share data, provide biochemical support, and offer discrete application of their early-stage therapy, assuming it passed Elon's safety standards. In return, Project NIA would supply Ava's evolving model and serve as its first human application. A dangerous gamble, but also the first real pathway forward. Before leaving, Dr. Nordgren handed Elon a sealed vial of faintly glowing golden oil inside a temperature-controlled case. We haven't tested this on children, she said carefully, but it's your decision now. Elon stared at the vial, fingers wrapped gently around it like it might break from hope alone. On the flight home, he didn't sleep. He wrote, outlined next steps, texted Julian to prep the interface, asked Dr. Kaufman to review the compound's molecular breakdown. And as the plane began its descent into Los Angeles, he sent Clara a message. Not the cure, but a path. Clara's reply came within a minute. I already knew. Elon smiled, his shoulders slumping slightly, not from defeat, but release. For the first time in months, he allowed himself the smallest exhale of hope, not theoretical, not abstract. Hope that could be touched, held, administered. Hope sealed in a glass vial, waiting to be tried. It arrived in a small, unassuming package, barely the size of a shoebox. Elon signed for it himself. The courier had no idea what he was delivering, just another international medical shipment, marked perishable and urgent. But inside was the culmination of months of desperation, science, and something close to grace. Clara stood behind him as he peeled back the layers, ice packs, thermal insulation, and finally a sealed metal container labeled in clean Swedish typography. Inside that, nestled in a foam mold, was the amber vial. It looked like nothing. It looked like everything. A single dose of the Lanska oil compound, suspended in a golden liquid that shimmered when turned against the light. There were two thick instruction booklets, one in Swedish, the other machine-translated into English, filled with disclaimers, contraindications, and clinical caution. A laminated card taped to the inner lid read simply, Phase 1, Observe. They took the package directly to the clinic that same afternoon, driving in silence. Dr. Lawrence Chong, the neurologist overseeing Ava's care in the U.S., met them in a private room prepped for the trial. He had been briefed, though reluctantly. The compound had not passed through FDA channels, had no established safety profile, and had only been tested once on an adult patient with a different disorder. He eyed the vial with professional discomfort. You understand this is off record. I can't file this. I can't endorse it. If anything goes wrong. Elon cut him off gently. We know the risks, but we also know what happens if we do nothing. Clara stood at the bedside, holding Ava's hand. The little girl was propped up on pillows, her crutches resting beside her chair like faithful soldiers. She looked pale but alert. In her lap was a folded drawing of Nia standing on a mountaintop, arms outstretched, with the words "Let's try anyway" written in Ava's shaky print. Dr. Chong prepared the dosage with gloved hands, inserting the liquid into a special delivery capsule designed for sublingual absorption. It would dissolve slowly under the tongue, allowing the compound to enter the bloodstream gradually. They had decided together, Elon, Clara, Dr. Chong, and the Swedish team via video, that this was the least invasive way to start. Ava looked at the vial before it was administered. Her brow furrowed. Will it hurt? Clara crouched down beside her, brushing back a strand of hair. It might feel strange, maybe even tingly, but we'll be here, the whole time. Ava nodded slowly, swallowing once. Okay, let's try anyway. The capsule was placed under her tongue at exactly 9:12 a.m. on a Saturday. And then they waited. The room was quiet. No sudden changes. No alarms. Just Ava blinking slowly, processing the odd texture and taste. It's like lemony robot oil, she mumbled. Everyone chuckled. A fragile laugh, held together by fear. For the next hour, they observed. Elon sat near the window, notebook in hand, recording vitals and reactions with the meticulousness of a launch engineer. Clara read aloud one of Ava's favorite Nia chapters, The Bridge of Nerves, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. Dr. Chong remained close, tracking neurological signs, muscle activity, and oxygen levels. By noon, Ava became drowsy. Her speech slowed. Her eyes fluttered. She's metabolizing it, Dr. Chong murmured. Is that good? Elon asked. It's not bad. They let her sleep. The rest of the day blurred into long silences, soft beeps from monitors, whispered reassurances. Elon barely left her side. Clara took short breaks to step outside, breathe, and come back stronger. That night, Ava slept soundly, deeper than usual. Elon didn't sleep at all. He sat in a chair beside her, a journal in his lap, eyes fixed on every rise and fall of her chest. He thought about the first time he held her, just minutes after she was born. He had whispered something to her then. I'll build you anything you need, he had said. Now he was trying to build time, nerve strength, hope. When the sun rose on Sunday, golden and hesitant through the hospital window, Clara stirred first. She found Elon still awake, circles under his eyes, his hair slightly disheveled. Ava's heart monitor pulsed its usual rhythm. Nothing dramatic, nothing catastrophic. Clara reached for Elon's hand. He didn't resist. Then just after 7 a.m., Ava opened her eyes. She blinked against the light, then smiled sleepily. Her voice was soft but clear. I had a dream. Clara leaned in. What did you dream, sweetie? Ava yawned, stretching slightly. I was walking in a big field, like the one from our road trip, and my legs, they obeyed. I didn't fall. I just ran. Elon's breath hitched. He held it frozen. Clara's eyes filled, her lips trembling into a smile. That sounds like a beautiful dream. Ava nodded. It felt real. No one spoke after that. The room held its breath. It wasn't a miracle. Not yet. But it was something. The first sign. The first light breaking through the long dark. The days that followed blurred into a rhythm that only the three of them seemed to understand. From the outside, nothing looked revolutionary. There were no headlines, no breakthroughs declared, no moment where the world shifted on its axis. But inside their little orbit, every minute was calibrated to hope. Ava's mornings began with the same routine. Clara would bring her warm water and the capsule, which now sat in a velvet-lined box on her nightstand like a relic. The label in Swedish remained unreadable, but it no longer mattered. Ava had named it the Golden Drop. She would take it with a sip, make a face at the aftertaste, like robot lemons again, and lean back into her pillow. Some mornings she felt nauseous. The color drained from her cheeks, and she'd lie curled on the bed, forehead slightly damp. Other mornings she was sleepy, eyes heavy until midday. But every so often, in a quiet act of rebellion against decline, something flickered back. It started subtly. One Tuesday, Ava stood up in the living room to grab a crayon and forgot to use her crutches. She walked 3 full steps before Clara realized it. By the time she rushed over, Ava had already sat down, unaware of what she'd done. Clara didn't say anything at first, just smiled, and later wrote in her journal 3 steps. Unassisted, no tremor, no fear. Elon began to document the progress in his own way. He transformed one wall of the lab into a visual timeline, a progress panel. At the top, in bold letters cut from silver foil, it read, Ava's Path. Every milestone, no matter how small, had its place. A sticky note for each step. A color-coded pin for changes in speech, coordination, energy. Photos of her smiling, laughing, drawing. He tracked data obsessively, but this wall wasn't about metrics, it was about meaning. There was a note dated week 3 that read, held spoon for full breakfast. No spill. Another week 4, walked from bed to bathroom with only one crutch. A tiny drawing of a heart with wings was added beneath it by Ava herself. Sign Nia was here. Clara kept her own log, quieter, more intimate. In a weathered leather-bound notebook she'd carried since the diagnosis, she recorded not just physical changes, but emotional ones. She wrote down Ava's dreams, the colors she chose in her drawings, the nights she cried, and the mornings she asked questions like, do you think Nia is proud of me, or will my legs remember me someday? The answer was always yes. Sometimes the days felt exactly the same. Wake, dose, wait, watch, sleep, repeat. The silence between symptoms was heavy with anticipation. They monitored every hiccup, every twitch, every pause in a sentence. But sometimes the sameness was a gift. No regression, no seizures, no new symptoms, no change, said Dr. Chong after 6 weeks. But also no decline. That's statistically significant. Statistically, Elon repeated, or miraculously? Dr. Chong allowed a faint smile. Both. The lab team, still small and unorthodox, began referring to Ava's case as the Nia loop, a term Julian had coined when noticing that Ava's neurological data had stabilized into a near plateau after the 4th week. It was an improvement in the traditional sense, but it was no longer deterioration either. It was stasis, which for a child on a one-way path toward loss felt like a dam against the flood. Ava herself didn't seem to care about charts or cycles. What mattered to her were the tangible things: drawing without dropping the pencil, walking from one room to another with flip but without flop, reading aloud without stammering, racing Clara in a slow, giggling shuffle down the hallway. She lived moment to moment, and that was something Elon and Clara learned to emulate. They stopped talking about the long term. It was too heavy, too unknown. Instead, they celebrated each good day as its own story. On one afternoon, Ava danced, if it could be called that, spinning in place with her arms out, crutches momentarily abandoned. Clara cried. Elon recorded it. Ava just beamed and shouted, "I'm storm-proof." Other days were less magical. There were still fevers, nights of leg pain, days of brain fog. But even then, Clara would mark them in her journal, pain, but not panic. We know this storm. We've mapped it. They continued the Nia stories, too. Ava dictated them from her bed or while sitting on the patio. Elon would type as Clara sat nearby sketching illustrations. The latest chapter was titled The Waiting Room of Winds, where Nia learned patience by listening to silent galaxies whisper their stories. There was no guarantee of what came next, no promise of permanence. But each day that Ava woke up and moved, each day that her laughter echoed in the hallway or her drawing appeared on the lab wall, was a day they hadn't been promised. And that, to both Elon and Clara, was nothing short of a miracle. The house had taken on a rhythm, steady and gentle, shaped around Ava's needs and the quiet rituals of hope. Her bedroom had become more than a place to sleep. It was now the observation hub, a softly lit cocoon of monitors, data streams, and dreams. Elon had installed a discreet AI-powered sleep monitoring system in the corner, its blinking light as subtle as a heartbeat. The camera didn't just record, it learned. It mapped Ava's breathing patterns, her REM cycles, and subtle muscle twitches, logging everything into the growing NIA database like digital breadcrumbs of a mystery they were still unraveling. To accommodate the setup, Clara had moved to the living room, folding out the worn gray sofa into a makeshift bed that creaked every time she turned. It wasn't comfortable, but comfort had stopped being a priority months ago. What mattered was proximity, the ability to hear Ava's voice if she called out, or rush to her room at the smallest sound. They worked in shifts now. Elon took the early hours, midnight to dawn, while Clara rested. Then they'd switch. This pattern evolved not from discussion, but from necessity, a silent agreement built on instinct. It allowed them both to remain human, present, and functioning in a world that often threatened to collapse under its own emotional weight. One morning, still gray with pre-dawn light, Clara stirred from the couch and sat up slowly, rubbing the sleep from her eyes. The hallway was quiet. She walked barefoot to Ava's door, expecting to find Elon reviewing data on his tablet or possibly dozing in the armchair they'd pushed against the far wall. Instead, she found him on the floor. Elon was seated cross-legged beside Ava's bed, a thin book in his hands, reading aloud in a soft, almost whispered voice. Ava was asleep, her face turned toward the sound, her breathing slow and even. Elon's voice barely rose above the hush of the machine beside them. Clara leaned against the doorframe, listening. It took her a moment to recognize the book, The Little Prince, Ava's favorite. They hadn't read it in months. Ava had asked for it during one of her harder nights, and Clara hadn't had the strength to get through it without crying. But Elon was reading it now, with care, with reverence, his voice catching slightly on the familiar words. "Is only with the heart that one can see rightly. What is essential is invisible to the eye." She cleared her throat gently. He turned, surprised but not embarrassed. "You still read to her?" she asked softly. "When no one's watching," he replied, setting the book down gently. "Yes." She didn't answer, just stepped in and sat beside him on the floor. They stayed there for a while watching Ava sleep, her small frame wrapped in blankets patterned with stars. Later that morning, they had coffee together in the kitchen. Not a planned sit-down, just two mugs filled at the same time. Clara leaned against the counter, sipping slowly. Elon sat on a stool, one hand wrapped around the warm ceramic, the other rubbing the back of his neck. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. The silence between them wasn't empty anymore. It held things. It held memories of arguments and shared laughter, of hospital visits and birthday parties, of things said too late and things never said at all. But more than that, it held the fragile, slow-building architecture of now. A quiet cohabitation that had started as a necessity and was becoming something else. One afternoon, Clara was washing dishes while humming a tune, something gentle and wordless, a melody her grandmother used to sing while shelling peas in a Sicilian courtyard. She hadn't even realized she was doing it. Elon passed through the kitchen, paused and listened. She noticed him watching her and smirked. "What?" "Nothing," he said, smiling. "I didn't know you sing." "I didn't know you still wear your shoes to bed," she replied. He laughed. I don't mean to. It just happens. They began to notice other things too. Small details that had been lost in the chaos of separation and years apart. Clara had a habit of tapping her index finger against her mug 3 times before every sip. Elon whispered to himself while he wrote code. Clara still used the same floral notepad to make grocery lists. Elon never added sugar to anything, but always stole a bite of Ava's dessert. The intimacy of the ordinary crept in. They weren't a couple. They didn't talk about what this was. But they started making 2 cups of coffee instead of 1. They started folding laundry together. They started pausing in doorways a moment longer than necessary. And Ava noticed. One evening, while coloring in the living room, she looked up and said, "You two are being nice again." Clara raised an eyebrow. "Were we mean before?" Ava shrugged. "You were quiet in the wrong way. Now it's the good kind." Elon smiled, then reached over and ruffled her hair. "You always know too much." That night, after Ava had gone to sleep and the machines were humming their low, methodical lullaby, Elon stood in the doorway of the living room and watched Clara as she pulled a blanket over herself on the couch. He hesitated, then said, "I could take the sofa tonight." She looked at him, then at the hallway leading to Ava's room. "No," she said gently. "You read better than I do." He nodded. There was no declaration. No rekindled romance framed in fireworks. Just 2 people slowly remembering how to breathe beside each other. Not because everything was healed, but because some things like faith or forgiveness are built in the quiet when no one is watching. It had been nearly 4 months since Ava had stepped into a classroom, and even then, her last memory of school was blurry. Hallways filled with voices she could no longer keep pace with, classmates moving faster than her body allowed, and the quiet sadness of feeling left behind. Clara had been cautious but persistent, gently suggesting the return for weeks, while Elon had resisted, his protective instincts louder than logic. "She's stable, not invincible," he had said more than once. But Ava had the final word. "I miss being where other kids are," she said one morning, brushing glitter onto a new drawing of Nia. "Even if I can't run, I still want to stand." That settled it. Clara arranged for a part-time return, just 2 afternoons a week. Her school, a progressive public charter, welcomed her back with thoughtful adjustments, a shorter schedule, rest periods, access to a reading nook with a plush beanbag chair, and a privacy curtain. Her teacher, Ms. D'Angelo, was young, warm, and quietly brilliant. She met with Elon and Clara personally, asking about Ava's condition, but more importantly, about Ava herself. What made her feel safe? What made her feel brave? On Friday, just before dismissal, Ms. D'Angelo introduced the day's special activity, a mini-project called Things We Don't See. It was meant to teach abstract thinking, to explore the invisible, gravity, emotions, thoughts, dreams. Most kids brought drawings of wind or little blurbs about love or fear. Ava sat quietly through the presentations, hands folded on her desk, her glittered crutch, just flipped today, resting against her chair. Then Ms. D'Angelo said, "Ava, would you like to go next?" A stillness rippled through the classroom. Ava's peers turned toward her, unsure, curious, careful. For a moment, she didn't move. Then she reached under her desk and retrieved a folder, worn, bent, filled with papers that had traveled from her bedside to lab walls and back again. She stood up slowly. Every movement was deliberate. Her knees trembled just slightly, but she didn't falter. Clara, watching from the back of the room, where she quietly slipped in moments earlier, gripped the back of a chair. Ava made her way to the front. No one helped her. No one offered. They knew better. She reached the whiteboard and turned to face the class. Her voice, when it came, was small, but it didn't shake. "I'm Ava," she began, "and I came to tell you about something invisible." A few of the kids leaned forward. She held up a hand-drawn map, laminated and bright, filled with stars and bridges and something like veins connecting each land. "This is from the Project Nia. It's something my parents and their friends made when the doctors said they couldn't help me anymore." She paused. "It's for a thing that's inside my brain. You can't see it with your eyes, but it tries to make me stop walking, or sometimes stop thinking straight, or remembering. but this map helps us find ways to talk to it. No one breathed. There's this oil, she continued, from Sweden. It's not magic. It tastes weird, but it's like a secret code that maybe helps my brain remember how to be strong again. And there are scientists who didn't know me, but helped anyway. She took a deep breath. Her gaze scanned the room. Some days walking hurts. Some days not walking hurts even more. Clara covered her mouth. But Nia, she's a girl I made up. She goes inside my body to fix things. And now, there are real people trying to help me do the same thing. And I draw maps so they don't get lost. Because it's easy to get lost when something invisible is chasing you. She reached into her folder again and pulled out a second drawing, one she hadn't shown anyone yet. It was a simple design, a hill with a tree at the top and a winding path leading up to it, surrounded by words, tiny, scattered affirmations like try again, even slow is forward, and courage lives here. This, she said, holding it up, is the place where we don't give up. The class didn't move. One girl blinked hard. A boy in the second row clutched his pencil tightly, as if anchoring himself to the moment. Ms. D'Angelo's voice cracked slightly when she finally said, "Thank you, Ava." Ava nodded, turned, and made her way back to her desk, moving carefully, proudly. Flip clicked with each step. After school, Clara met her just outside the door. "You were incredible," she whispered, crouching to hug her. Ava shrugged with a smile. "I just told the truth." Later that night, Elon stood in front of the timeline wall at the lab. He pinned a copy of Ava's new drawing right in the center, under a label he scribbled in thick black marker. Milestone number 28. She stood alone. The storm rolled in softly at first, just a murmur in the distance, a brush of wind against the trees. But by nightfall, the rain was steady and deliberate, tapping against the windows like a metronome. Inside the house, everything was quiet. Ava had gone to bed early after a day of physical therapy and spelling games with Clara. Her energy, though still limited, was slowly becoming more predictable. That in itself felt like a victory. Elon sat at the kitchen table with a cup of rooibos tea, growing cold, between his hands. The lights were dimmed, the hum of the refrigerator and the soft creak of the floorboards the only background noise. He stared down at Ava's latest drawing, a simple landscape she called the Field of Tomorrow, where Nia walked barefoot under glowing moons. It wasn't taped to the lab wall yet. He hadn't had the heart to take it from her room. His phone buzzed on the counter. The screen lit up with a name he hadn't seen in weeks, Kimball. Elon stared at it for a long moment, then answered. "Hey," he said, voice low, careful not to wake Clara, who was resting on the couch. "About time," came Kimball's voice, warm and teasing. "I was starting to think you got abducted by your own satellites." Elon smiled faintly. "No, just life. The kind that doesn't make the news." There was a pause. "You disappeared, man. Not just from me, from everyone." I had to. I didn't know how to explain this, what was happening. I barely understood it myself. "Then tell me now." No scripts, no filters. And Elon did. He leaned back in the chair, staring at the storm outside the window, and started from the beginning. He told Kimball about the fall at the zoo, about the moment Ava's eyes looked through him instead of at him, about the neurologists who shrugged, the hospital corridors that smelled like disinfected endings. He talked about the night he and Clara sat in silence with a diagnosis between them, like a fire they couldn't put out. Then came the parts Kimball didn't expect, how Elon had gathered a mismatched team of volunteers, how Clara had become the soul of the mission, how Ava's stories had shaped more than just morale. They had shaped the science. The oil from Sweden. The first dose. The night Ava dreamed she could walk again. The silence they clung to every morning, praying for another day that didn't get worse. Kimball listened without interrupting. For almost 20 minutes, he said nothing, not even when Elon's voice broke or when the pauses stretched into long, heavy spaces. When the story ended, Elon let out a long breath. "So," he said softly, "that's where I've been." Kimball exhaled too, like he had been holding something in. "Damn." Elon chuckled. "Yeah." Another silence. Then Kimball spoke again, voice quieter now. "You sound different." "How so?" "I don't know, grounded. Not in a burned-out way. Just whole. Like you're standing on something real for the first time in years." Elon thought about that. He glanced at the couch where Clara lay curled under a blanket, her face half lit by the soft glow from the hallway. He thought of Ava's sleeping form, the soft rise and fall of her chest, the way her fingers twitched when she dreamed. "I'm broken," Elon said, "but it's the first time I know exactly what I'm trying to fix." That hit Kimball hard. Elon could hear the shift in his breath. "I want in," Kimball said. "I don't care what stage you're at. I'll invest whatever's needed. More than that, I can activate the restaurant network. Use them as donation centers. We could set up a Maps of Hope campaign based on Ava's drawings. Customers could sponsor stars or bridges or whole territories. You'd be amazed what a family will give if they believe it's personal." Elon was quiet, but only because he couldn't find the words quickly enough. His throat tightened. "You don't have to do that," he finally said. "I know," Kimball replied, "but I want to. This isn't charity. This is family." A few seconds passed. Then, as if pulled by instinct, Kimball's tone changed, more cautious now, but laced with curiosity. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. Do you still love Clara?" Elon's hand stopped mid-stir over his now lukewarm tea. Outside, the rain picked up again, drumming harder against the glass. He didn't speak, didn't move, but Kimball didn't press. He didn't need to. "That's what I thought," he said, with a tenderness only a sibling can offer. "Then don't wait forever to figure out what to do with that. Some things don't circle back twice. You know." Elon closed his eyes. The weight of that truth sat heavily on his shoulders, but not painfully. Just honestly. "She saved me," he whispered. "I believe it." They stayed on the line a few minutes longer, no longer needing to talk. Eventually, they hung up with the soft kind of goodbye that only happens between people who know they'll speak again soon. Elon stood and walked into the living room. Clara was still asleep on the couch, her hand resting lightly against her cheek. Her hair had fallen loose, and her brow was smooth, her usual tension dissolved for the night. He sat gently on the armrest and watched her breathe. Not intrusively, just present. Then he looked down at Ava's drawing in his hand, the field of tomorrow, and smiled. Because maybe tomorrow wasn't just Ava's. Maybe it was his too. It was Ava's idea. She announced it on a sunny Saturday afternoon while coloring a new map at the kitchen table. This one called the Forest of Familiar Things, where the trees whispered forgotten memories back to those who listened carefully. Elon had just returned from the lab with updated neural scan data. Clara was slicing strawberries for a snack. The house was calm, light pouring in through the windows, a rare and delicate kind of peace hanging in the air. Ava looked up and said matter-of-factly, "Let's have dinner. All three of us. Like before." Clara paused, her knife still pressed into the strawberry. Elon looked up from his tablet. "Dinner?" he asked. "Yeah," Ava nodded. "Like when I was little. Before all this. Just us three. One table. No work. No phones. Just us." Clara and Elon exchanged a glance. It was a complicated look, part hesitation, part nostalgia, part something unspoken. But neither of them said no. "Okay," Clara said, smiling softly. "Let's do it." They let Ava plan the whole thing. She took it seriously, as if she were organizing a summit between two powerful countries with fragile diplomatic ties. She picked the food, pizza of course, because it makes people talk nicer. She chose paper napkins from a drawer, pink ones with hearts printed on them from a forgotten Valentine's Day. She folded them carefully and placed them at each seat. Then, while Clara and Elon set the plates and glasses, Ava disappeared into her room for 10 minutes. When she returned, she carried 3 small notes in her hand, one for each of them. She slid them silently under the edge of each dinner plate, like secret messages only to be discovered mid-meal. At 6:30, they sat together at the dining table. The room felt different, charged with memory. The last time they had all shared a meal at that table had been before the diagnosis, before the maps and the oil and the white walls of hospitals. Back then, the table had been cluttered with school papers, coffee cups, and half-finished Lego creations. Tonight, it was neatly set, with mismatched ceramic plates and grape juice in wine glasses. Ava raised her glass and said, "To second chances." They clinked their glasses, careful not to spill. The sound was soft but significant. They ate slowly, laughing over stories that had once lived only in separate memories, Elon retelling the time Ava tried to build a squirrel rocket using kitchen foil and a paper towel tube. Clara remembering how Elon once tried to make homemade pasta and ended up gluing the colander to the sink. Ava added color to both tales with her own details, reshaping the past in a way only children can, with sincerity and imagination. Midway through the meal, they discovered the notes. Elon unfolded his quietly. In Ava's slanted handwriting with a purple crayon, "You build rockets, but you taught me how to wait." He stared at the words for a long moment, not blinking, then looked at Ava, who smiled without saying a word. Clara's note read, "You give me courage even when you're scared." She covered her mouth with her hand, laughter and tears battling in her eyes. She reached over and squeezed Ava's hand. "You're getting too wise for 7. Ava beamed. "I had a lot of teachers." After dinner, Ava insisted they play a game of Uno. They all groaned dramatically, but complied. Elon, as always, played too competitively and lost. Clara claimed to be terrible, and somehow won every round. Ava laughed until her sides hurt. For a while, everything was light again. When it grew late, Clara gave Ava a warm bath and tucked her into bed. Elon read the final chapter of The Bridge of Nerves aloud, Ava's newest Nia story, while Clara watched from a doorway. When Ava finally drifted to sleep, her hand resting gently on Flip, the crutch she now used less and less, Clara switched off the bedside lamp. Back in the kitchen, the table still held the remnants of dinner. Empty glasses, a crust of pizza, the notes folded neatly beside each plate. Clara began gathering the dishes. She moved with practiced ease, stacking plates and rinsing them under warm water. The night had gone better than either of them expected, and yet the air was still heavy with everything unspoken. Elon walked up behind her, silent for a moment. "You always start cleaning before the night ends," he said. Clara half smiled. "Old habits." He hesitated, then spoke quietly. "I didn't want to leave. Back then. I know it looked like I did, but I didn't." She stopped rinsing. The water kept running. "I know," she said, not looking at him. "I was scared. Of failing. Of breaking more than I already had." She nodded, turned off the faucet, finally looked at him. "I was scared too," she said, "that I'd have to do it all alone. That I wasn't enough." "You were," Elon said. "You are." They stood there between plates and memories, between past fractures and possible futures. The space between them had shrunk, not just physically, but in all the invisible ways that mattered. "You're here now," she said. "I don't want to leave again." Clara didn't answer. Instead, she reached for a towel, dried her hand slowly, and placed it on the counter. Then, very gently, she leaned her head against his shoulder. And Elon didn't move, because sometimes forgiveness doesn't arrive in grand gestures or perfect words. Sometimes it starts with a meal, a folded note, and a silence that finally feels safe. It had been circled on the calendar for 3 weeks, Thursday, 9 a.m., a date that sat like a silent weight on everyone's chest. The appointment wasn't just another checkup or a routine scan. It was the day. The first full neurological assessment since Ava had started the Swedish protocol. Clara had written the time on a sticky note, folded it in her wallet, and repeated it like a prayer. Elon had added it to 4 different calendars, each linked to a notification chain that reminded him every 12 hours. Not that he ever forgot. The night before, Clara barely slept. She sat curled on the couch with a blanket wrapped around her legs, staring at the darkened TV screen, her thoughts louder than any show could have been. She kept hearing the doctor's voice before even hearing it, rehearsing bad news in her mind, preparing herself to hold steady for Ava, the same way she always did. Elon, meanwhile, worked late into the night in the lab, adjusting the data visualization for Ava's baseline metrics. It wasn't necessary. Nothing new would be measured until after the results. But he needed to do something, needed to feel in control of some part of this. Ava, somehow, was the calmest of the three. The morning of the appointment, she ate a bowl of oatmeal with banana slices and honey, humming to herself while Clara tried to hide the tremble in her hands as she packed a notebook and a pen. Elon had dressed in quiet black, no logos, no press-ready suit, just a plain sweater and jeans. He looked like a man trying not to expect too much. When they arrived at the clinic, the receptionist already knew their names. A nurse escorted them past the waiting room and into a private corridor. No waiting with other patients. No curious glances. This was different now. Everyone on staff had heard of the Musk girl. Not because of a name, but because of what had been happening. Inside the exam room, the air was cool, the walls a soft seafoam green. The neurologist, Dr. Chong, greeted them with his usual measured tone, clipboard in hand, a new assistant by his side. He explained the process again, even though they already knew. Full motor function tests, balance, speech clarity, short-term memory recall, reaction timing, MRI comparison, neuromuscular response. It took nearly 2 hours. Ava was focused, determined like a little scientist in her own right. When asked to squeeze a rubber ball, she did it twice. When asked to recite a sentence backward, she grinned and added a rhyme at the end. When asked to stand on one leg for 10 seconds, she made it to 7 before tipping over and laughed. Clara laughed too, but it cracked a little at the edges. Elon simply nodded, his hands gripping each other tightly in his lap. When it was done, Dr. Chong asked them to return in 3 days. "There's a lot to analyze," he said, "and I want to be thorough." They nodded. 3 days of waiting. It felt like eternity wrapped in slow hours. Clara cleaned the entire house twice. Elon tried to work, but found himself staring at the same line of code for over an hour. Ava drew. She created a new map, the City of Stillness. In it, every building was made of glass, and inside each was a person holding a candle. Because sometimes standing still is the bravest thing you can do, she told Clara. Finally, Thursday arrived. They returned to the clinic. Same room, same chairs, but everything felt heavier. Dr. Chong came in with a thick folder and a digital tablet. He didn't sit right away. He looked at each of them carefully. His face was unreadable. "I'm going to be direct," he said. Clara's hands clenched around her knees. Elon's jaw tightened. "The disease's progression," Dr. Chong continued, "has stopped. Silence. Real silence. The kind that pulls all the oxygen out of a room." Clara covered her face with both hands. Her shoulders trembled. Elon didn't move at first. Then his hand shot out to grip the edge of the chair, knuckles white. His eyes welled, but he didn't blink. "Not yet." Dr. Chong went on. "She hasn't regressed. She hasn't improved significantly in motor strength or speed. But she hasn't gotten worse. No new lesions. No further degradation in neural signal. What she's done is at the very least a neurological pause. That's never happened before in this subtype." He laid down the folder, filled with side-by-side MRI images and charts. "This isn't just stabilization. It's a potential threshold shift. It's unheard of." Ava looked up at him calmly. "So I'm not getting worse?" "You're not," he confirmed, smiling now. "And that means something. That means something big." She grinned. "Then it's my turn now." "To do what?" the assistant asked gently. "To help someone else," Ava replied. Dr. Chong looked at her for a moment, then stepped forward and extended his hand. Ava reached out, no hesitation, and shook it firmly. "You already are," he said. "More than you know." Clara wiped her eyes with a tissue and reached for Elon's hand across the space between their chairs. He didn't hesitate. He took it. Not a word was spoken between them. They just held on. Tightly. Steady. Because in a world where everything had once been slipping away, holding still together felt like the biggest miracle of all. The invitation came folded into a quiet morning. It arrived in the form of an email from the International Consortium for Rare Neurological Disorders, a yearly symposium attended by some of the most brilliant, skeptical, and meticulous minds in medicine. Elon was asked to speak not as a founder of SpaceX or Tesla, not even as an innovator in tech, but as the lead collaborator on something personal, Project NIA. A protocol that, by all conventional definitions, should not have worked, and yet had. He read the invitation twice before forwarding it to Clara with a simple message. "Should we go?" Her reply came back just 2 words. "Let's show them." Arrangements were made swiftly. The event would be held in Geneva, Switzerland, a neutral stage for a global conversation. Ava couldn't travel, too much risk, too many moving parts, but she didn't seem bothered. She packed her backpack the night before their flight and placed a bundle of drawings and markers inside, handing it solemnly to her grandmother. "I'll make maps while you're gone," she said. "Tell the scientists I said hi." The flight was long but quiet. Clara read from a medical journal most of the way, highlighting key passages and jotting notes in the margins. Elon stared out the window, revising his presentation in his mind, rehearsing how to turn data into something human. They didn't talk much, but when their hands brushed while reaching for the same bottle of water, neither pulled away. Geneva greeted them with soft snow and clean air. The venue, a sweeping auditorium tucked inside a modern medical research complex, was already buzzing with delegates from more than 40 countries. The schedule listed Elon's talk in bold, and next to it, Clara's name had been added under a new section, Patient-Family Perspectives. Elon adjusted his tie in the mirror backstage and caught Clara watching him. "Nervous?" she asked. He exhaled. "I can land rockets. This is harder." "You're not selling a product," she said gently. "You're telling a truth." They walked out together as the moderator introduced them. The lights were bright, the crowd vast, researchers, clinicians, biotech investors, parents, advocates. Some looked curious, some skeptical, some weary with the weight of 100 failures. Elon stood at the center of the stage, a single slide behind him showing the neural degradation pattern typical of Ava's condition. Then he clicked to the next, the same scan months later. Stabilized, untouched, a quiet gas moved through the room. He didn't talk about success in grandiose terms. He didn't use buzzwords or cite valuation metrics. Instead, he spoke as a father. "I didn't start this to disrupt an industry," he said. "I started because my daughter was losing herself one symptom at a time, and I refused to watch that happen in silence." He showed the interface Julian had built, the one modeled on Ava's drawings. He explained how the team had created a therapeutic sequence using her imaginative maps as neurovisual cues to trigger cooperation in regions that standard medicine had long ignored. Then he paused and pulled up a final slide, a photo of Ava smiling in her hospital bed, surrounded by hand-drawn stars and floating bridges. Below it, one line, "She's not a miracle. She's persistence." The room went still. Then came Clara's turn. She stepped up to the podium, her voice soft at first, but steady. She didn't talk about mechanisms or graphs. She talked about love and exhaustion, and what it means to keep going when everything in you wants to lie down. "Science without empathy," she said, "loses the very people it tries to save." What changed Ava's trajectory wasn't just a molecule. It was being seen. It was being believed. It was being surrounded by people who didn't care if something had never been done before, they just cared that she was still here. By the time she finished, the audience wasn't simply impressed, they were moved. A silence followed that no one rushed to fill. Then the questions began. Doctors from Japan, Brazil, France, and India approached afterward, not to critique, but to learn. They asked about the oil formulation, the ethical approval path, the AI-assisted visualization, the replication strategy. Clara handed out printed versions of Ava's maps and translation guidelines. Elon answered clinical questions with sharp clarity, always returning to the importance of personalization. "We didn't treat a disease," he said. "We treated Ava." They left the building an hour later, walking slowly into the crisp Geneva evening. The sun was dipping behind the snowy rooftops, painting the streets in amber. Elon reached out and took Clara's hand. For a split second, he expected the old reflex, her pulling away, the silence that used to follow when closeness was too hard to hold. But she didn't let go. She laced her fingers through his, looked up at him with a tired but real smile, and kept walking. And in that moment, beneath the quiet Swiss sky, something fragile and long dormant stirred back to life. It wasn't just about the science anymore. It never had been. The morning was the kind that arrived slowly, without fanfare, quiet, golden, and still. Light crept gently through the sheer curtains, brushing against the edges of the room like a secret being whispered awake. The world hadn't stirred yet. It was that rare window between dreams and duty when time felt suspended and everything important happened in silence. Elon stood in the kitchen, barefoot, filling the kettle. The air smelled of cinnamon from the leftover crumble Clara had made the night before. He moved with ease, not like the tech mogul the world knew, but like a man reacquainting himself with simplicity, grinding beans, measuring water, watching the steam rise. Across the room, Clara sat by the window with her legs tucked under her, wrapped in an oversized sweater, a tablet in her lap. She was reading messages, dozens of them, sent from families across the globe. Parents from Kenya, from Chile, from Ukraine. A neurologist in Seoul. A mother in Mumbai. A father in a small town outside Lyon. Some had questions. Some sent medical data. Some just wrote thank you. All of them had found hope in a story that was never meant to go this far. In Ava, she scrolled through slowly, eyes misting over certain lines. One mother had written, "My daughter drew her first map today. She called it the place I still believe." In the bedroom down the hall, Ava slept diagonally across the bed, her blanket pushed off, feet bare and toes twitching in small, dreamlike movements, like she was dancing with something only she could see. The room was decorated with her hand-drawn maps, some fading from age, others freshly taped up the week before. The walls weren't just walls, they were testaments. Ava's cartography of resilience. Elon carried 2 mugs to the table and set one in front of Clara. "Guatemalan roast," he said softly. "Your favorite." She glanced up with a warm smile and reached for it. "You remembered." "I forget everything except what matters." They sipped in silence for a moment. The light grew stronger, casting gold on the hardwood floor, illuminating the corners of the room that had once held tension, now softened by presence. Then Elon looked toward Ava's room and back at Clara. "What if this really works?" he asked. "Not just for her, for more of them." Clara held his gaze. She set the tablet down and leaned forward slightly, her elbows resting on the table. "Then everything we went through, the fear, the failures, the nights we didn't think she'd wake up, it'll all mean something bigger than us." He nodded slowly. She added, "Even if it's just one more child who doesn't forget how to walk, it's enough." He looked down for a moment, processing the weight of it, the beauty in its simplicity. Then, after a beat, he asked quietly, "And what if we try again?" Clara raised an eyebrow. "Try what?" He didn't look away this time. "Not just the project. Us." The words hung in the air, fragile and unarmored. She stared at him, unmoving. Not cold, just still. Then she inhaled deeply, letting it fill her completely. "We take it slow," she said. He smiled. "I can do slow." She tilted her head, studying him as if seeing something new, or perhaps something remembered. Then, yes. The answer wasn't dramatic. It didn't need to be. It was steady, like the morning light now spilling fully into the room, like the coffee warming their hands, like the quiet rhythm they had rebuilt without even realizing. In the bedroom, Ava turned in her sleep, murmured something about a moon bus, and stretched her arms above her head. One foot twitched again, like pressing on invisible grass. Elon looked toward her doorway. "She's dreaming." "She always is," Clara whispered, smiling. They sat back, side by side, the hum of the day slowly rising outside the window. Birds began to call. A car passed on the street. Somewhere nearby, a neighbor's dog barked once, then settled. On the far wall, a corkboard displayed a tangled map of strings and photos, clinical notes mixed with Ava's stars and hearts. Beneath it, a dry erase board held a list of goals: next-gen algorithm adaptation, cellular repair modeling, multi-patient trial outreach. But beside all of that, in Ava's looping handwriting, were 4 simple words: keep going, be kind. Clara reached out and placed her hand over Elon's. He looked down, then back up at her. And in that moment, there was no illness, no heartbreak, no uncertain future. There was just this: a girl sleeping soundly down the hall. 2 people choosing to rebuild, not from scratch, but from truth. And a field, wide, green, uncharted, stretching out ahead of them, waiting to be mapped. If this story touched you in any way, maybe because of Ava, the maps, the persistence, or that quiet kind of hope you might be holding on to too, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? And more than that, what part of this journey stayed with you? Was it something Ava said? A silent moment between Elon and Clara? Or just that question echoing in your chest: what if it works? We read every comment, truly. And who knows, maybe your words will become someone else's map toward hope.